The room was cold, the kind of sterile chill that chemical companies seem to pump through their vents to keep people from getting too comfortable. I sat across from Sylvia Thorne, the director of operations at AeroClean Technologies. Her desk was a pristine slab of polished white quartz, devoid of anything resembling actual laboratory work, no staining agents, no test tubes, no worn notebooks. Just a sleek laptop and a single sheet of paper she had slid toward me as if it were an award. I did not touch the paper, I did not need to examine it. The bold type at the top was clear enough. It was a restructure notice, a polite corporate term for a professional execution. My salary was being cut from $92,000 a year down to $36,000. That was a drop of over 60%. I looked at the numbers, then up at Sylvia. Her face was as smooth and expressionless as the quartz desk. She had her hands folded, fingers locked together, like a priest preparing for a sermon. She told me it was a strategic realignment across departments, a necessary measure to ensure long-term stability, but I knew better. I had seen the signs for months. Meetings I used to lead were quietly rescheduled. My lab access had been restricted to daylight hours. Budget requests for basic testing reagents were ignored, and equipment I had used for years was suddenly moved to other divisions. They were freezing me out. I am 48 years old. I have spent 8 years of my life at AeroClean Technologies. I arrived when their industrial sanitation line was a money-losing disaster, plagued by customer complaints and failing regulatory checks. I spent long days and longer nights breathing in acidic vapors, reforming their core surfactant blends, and testing new stabilizers. Within 3 years, I turned that failing division into their primary source of revenue, generating millions of dollars in clean profit. I did not ask for a corner office. I did not play the political games that Sylvia loved so much. I simply wanted to do my work, get paid my fair share, and go home to my son. But in the corporate world, if you do not blow your own trumpet, someone else will claim they wrote the song. Sylvia had spent the last 2 years taking credit for my updates, presenting my data to the board as if she had mixed the solutions herself. Now she wanted me gone, but she did not want to fire me. If she fired me, she would have to pay severance, and worse, she would have to explain to the board why the lead researcher had departed. A 60% salary reduction was her way of forcing me to resign. She figured I would walk out in anger, leaving my notes and formulas behind. She underestimated how much I needed that job, and more importantly, she underestimated what I was willing to do to protect my family. I did not scream. I did not slam my fists on the quartz desk. I simply looked her in the eye and said I would think about it. Sylvia tilted her head, her thin lips twitching with a hint of surprise. She had expected an outburst, a dramatic exit that she could use to justify escorting me from the building. Instead, I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out. When I reached my car, I sat in its driver's seat for a long time, staring at the gray concrete wall of the parking garage. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. My heart rate was slow and rhythmic. I did not feel defeated. I felt a cold, clear focus settling over me. Sylvia thought she had me cornered because of my personal situation. She knew I was a divorced father with sole custody of my 12-year-old son, Owen. She knew Owen suffered from severe Crohn's disease. The medical bills for his treatments, his specialty medications, and his regular doctor visits were astronomical, far exceeding what my monthly rent cost. Our health insurance barely covered half of the expenses, leaving me to scramble for the rest. Sylvia believed I was desperate. She believed I would accept any scrap she threw my way because I could not afford to lose my medical benefits. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence in the car was comforting, a blank canvas where I could arrange my thoughts. We lived in a small house on the edge of the city, a quiet place with an overgrown yard. When I walked inside, Owen was sitting at the kitchen counter, eating cereal and reading a science textbook. He looked up and smiled, his pale face lighting up despite the fatigue that always seemed to linger around his eyes. He asked if everything was all right at the office. I walked over, ruffled his hair, and assured him that everything was fine. I told him I was just going to do some work in the basement. He nodded and went back to his reading. The basement was my sanctuary. While AeroClean had their state-of-the-art facilities, the real breakthroughs had happened in my damp, low-ceilinged cellar. I had built a makeshift lab down there with salvaged counters, a second-hand centrifuge, and plastic bins filled with glassware. I had spent countless nights under the flickering fluorescent light, running tests on formulas that AeroClean refused to fund. I bought the chemical reagents with my own money and tracked every step of my progress in leather-bound notebooks. I kept digital logs, timestamped video recordings of my experiments, and detailed receipts for every piece of equipment I had purchased. I even had videos of Owen sitting at the counter upstairs while I worked below, documenting the exact dates and times. I had kept these records not out of paranoia, but out of a deep pride in my craft. Now those records were about to become my shield. The following morning, I took a personal day and drove 2 hours to Columbus. My destination was a modest brick building on the edge of the downtown district, where Jeffrey Cole had his law offices. Jeffrey was a senior patent attorney who specialized in chemical and industrial intellectual property. He was a meticulous man with silver hair and a quiet, deliberate manner that immediately inspired trust. I had contacted him through a secure, private email address several months prior, when I first noticed the subtle shift in how Sylvia was treating me at AeroClean. I had brought a heavy cardboard box filled with my basement records, the leather notebooks, the receipts for chemical purchases, printouts of the time-stamped video logs, and a copy of my original employment agreement from 8 years ago. Jeffrey had spent the previous week reviewing every document, and now he sat behind his desk with my contract open, a yellow highlighter in his hand. He looked up and offered a faint smile. He told me that my foresight was about to pay off. He pointed to the intellectual property assignment clause in my contract. The language was standard, but crucial. It stated that AeroClean Technologies owned all intellectual property, inventions, and discoveries created by employees during their designated working hours, on company premises, or utilizing company resources. Jeffrey explained that this clause left a significant opening. Because I had conducted all my research in my basement, using equipment I bought myself, and with chemical reagents purchased on my personal credit cards, the company had no claim to the results. He had cross-referenced my lab logs with my official timesheets. At AeroClean, there was not a single hour of overlap. Every breakthrough had occurred late at night, on weekends, or during federal holidays. We were completely in the clear. I asked him about the patents. Jeffrey reached into a folder and pulled out a stack of documents with official government headers. He told me that he had successfully filed 3 provisional patent applications with the United States Patent and Trademark Office the previous afternoon. They were registered solely under my name, Howard Vance. The most important of the 3 was the formula for the cold water sanitation compound. In the industrial cleaning market, this was a revolutionary development. Standard sanitation systems required water to be heated to high temperatures to activate the cleaning agents, which cost manufacturing plants thousands of dollars in energy bills every week. My compound functioned at room temperature, maintaining the same level of disinfection while cutting heating energy costs by 40%. It was the crown jewel of my research, and AeroClean had no idea it existed. They were still selling the same diluted, lemon-scented formulas that had not been updated in a decade. Jeffrey leaned forward, his expression growing serious. He told me that while my legal position was strong, Sylvia would likely try to claim ownership the moment she discovered the patents. He warned me that corporate legal departments often used intimidation tactics, filing baseless lawsuits to drain an individual's savings. He advised me to find an ally, a company with enough resources to stand behind my patents and shield me from AeroClean's pressure. That was when I told him about Julian Ward. Julian was the vice president of research and development at Apex Chemical Solutions, the largest competitor of AeroClean in the state. We had met years ago at a national chemical convention where we had shared a long conversation about surfactant chemistry. He knew my reputation and respected my work. I had sent him a brief encrypted message the night before, suggesting we discuss a new product line. Within 10 minutes, he had responded, asking for a meeting at a quiet diner outside the city. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived later that afternoon. Julian was already sitting in a corner booth, a cup of black coffee in front of him. He was a tall man with a sharp mind and a direct way of speaking. He did not waste time with small talk. He asked me why the lead researcher of AeroClean was requesting a secret meeting. I reached into my bag and pulled out a summary sheet of the Coldwater Compound's testing data, along with copies of the patent filing receipts. I slid them across the table. Julian picked them up, his eyes scanning the numbers. As he read, his posture changed. He sat up straighter, his eyebrows rising. He asked if these numbers were verified. I told him they were, based on 8 months of testing in my private lab. I explained that the patents were fully filed in my name and that I was prepared to license them. Julian looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. He told me that Apex had been trying to develop a similar compound for 3 years without success. He said my formula would give them a massive advantage in the industrial market. He asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted a position at Apex as the Senior Director of Product Development, with a base salary of $180,000 a year, full authority over the research budget, and comprehensive health benefits for my family. Most importantly, I told him that I would not transfer the patents. Apex would receive an exclusive license to use the formulas, but I would retain sole ownership of the intellectual property. Julian did not hesitate. He told me he would have his legal team draft the employment agreement and the licensing contract by the end of the week. We shook hands, and I walked out into the cool afternoon air, feeling the weight of the last few months finally beginning to lift. The transition did not happen overnight, but once the pieces began to move, they slid into place with satisfying precision. I spent the next 3 days reviewing the contracts Julian Ward had sent over. My lawyer, Jeffrey Cole, examined every sentence, ensuring that the licensing agreement was watertight. The terms were exactly as we had discussed. Apex Chemical Solutions would receive an exclusive license to manufacture and sell products based on my 3 sanitation formulas, and in return, they would pay me a royalty fee on every gallon sold. My new employment contract at Apex was equally generous, providing a base salary of $180,000 a year, comprehensive family health insurance, and full authority over their research laboratory in California. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of security. Owen's medical expenses would no longer be a dark cloud hanging over our heads. I signed the documents at Jeffrey's office on Thursday afternoon. The next step was cleaning out my workspace at AeroClean Technologies. I did not want to leave anything behind that Sylvia could use. Over the weekend, I went into the office under the pretense of catch-up work. The building was quiet, the corridors empty. I sat at my lab bench and began wiping my local hard drives. I did not delete company data, but I permanently erased every personal file, every informal research note, and every scrap of code I had written for my private experiments. I packed my personal belongings, a few reference books, a framed photograph of Owen, and a worn ceramic mug into a single cardboard box. At home, I spent Sunday afternoon packing up the basement lab. I boxed up my chemical samples, labeled the notebooks, and stored the equipment in plastic bins. The makeshift laboratory that had been the site of my greatest achievements was now empty, leaving only the bare concrete walls. I was ready to leave the shadows behind and step into a real laboratory, where my name would be on the patents. However, on Monday morning, a sudden obstacle appeared. I received an urgent phone call from Jeffrey Cole. His voice was tense as he told me that AeroClean's legal department had just sent him a formal letter. They had caught wind of my impending departure and were asserting full ownership over all my recent sanitation formulas. They claimed to possess a signed document that made my patent filings completely invalid. According to Jeffrey, they had produced a copy of a proprietary information and inventions agreement, allegedly signed by me on my very first day of employment 8 years ago. This document contained a retroactive clause stating that any invention developed during my tenure, regardless of whether it was created on company premises or off the clock, belonged entirely to AeroClean Technologies. I was stunned. I told Jeffrey that I had never signed such a document. I remembered my onboarding process clearly. I had read every page of the paperwork they gave me, and I had specifically avoided signing any contract with a broad invention assignment clause. I asked Jeffrey to send me a digital copy of the agreement immediately. When the file arrived in my email inbox, I opened it and studied the signature page. My heart hammered in my chest as I zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the document. It looked like my handwriting, but as I examined it closer, I noticed something strange. The signature was perfectly aligned with the text block, down to the millimeter. There was a tiny smudge near the capital letter of my name, the exact same smudge that appeared on the tax withholding forms I had submitted to HR 8 years ago. It was a forgery. Someone had taken a digital scan of my signature from my tax forms and superimposed it onto this fabricated agreement. Jeffrey Cole confirmed my suspicions. He told me that under California Penal Code Section 470, forging a signature on a legal contract is a felony. More importantly, he explained that under California law, a forged contract is void from the beginning, a principle known as void ab initio. It had no legal standing whatsoever. Sylvia Thorne, in her desperation to secure the patents for AeroClean, had crossed a dangerous line. She had committed a criminal act, thinking I would be too intimidated by the company's legal department to fight back. She did not realize that she had just handed me the ultimate weapon. Instead of panicking, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. I called Jeffrey back and outlined a plan. We would not file a lawsuit immediately. We would let AeroClean believe they had the upper hand until the very last moment. We spent the next 2 days preparing our counter-strategy. Jeffrey drafted a formal response, attaching the evidence of the forgery, along with a draft of a patent infringement complaint, under 35 United States Code Section 271. We also prepared a complaint for breach of fiduciary duty against Sylvia Thorne, arguing that by fabricating a legal document and exposing the company to massive statutory damages, she had violated her duty to the corporation. I kept my composure at the office, nodding politely whenever I passed Sylvia in the hallway, letting her believe her trap was about to spring. The final confrontation occurred on a rainy Wednesday morning in AeroClean's executive boardroom. Sylvia was already seated, flanked by 2 members of the board of directors and the company's chief legal counsel, a sharp-faced man named Nigel Croft. Sylvia had a smug, victorious smile as I walked in. She believed I was there to surrender. I did not sit down. I stood at the end of the mahogany table, unbuttoned my coat, and pulled a thick manila envelope from my bag. I slid it across the polished wood, letting it stop right in front of Sylvia. I told her it was my licensing proposal. For the 3 formulas I had developed, the fee would be $4,250 per formula per month, totaling $12,750 per month. I added that the agreement was non-negotiable and would remain active as long as they wished to use my technology. Sylvia let out a cold laugh, refusing to touch the envelope. She said the company already owned the formulas, pointing to a copy of the agreement on the table. She warned me that if I attempted to take my research to Apex, they would sue me for theft and blackball me from the industry. I remained calm, looking directly at Nigel Croft, the chief counsel. I reached into my bag and pulled out a second document, sliding it across the table. I told them to examine the forensic analysis of the signature on their agreement. I explained that the signature was a digital scan from my tax forms, superimposed onto a document I had never seen. I pointed out that forging a signature to secure intellectual property violates California Penal Code Section 470, a felony. I declared that because the signature was fabricated, the contract was void ab initio, possessing no legal validity. The smug smile vanished from Sylvia's face. She turned to Nigel Croft, insisting I was lying and that the agreement was genuine. But the chief counsel did not look in her direction. He was staring at the forensic report, his eyes scanning the side-by-side comparison. His face grew pale as he saw the pixel-level alignment of the smudge from my tax forms. I did not give them time to recover. I told them that my attorney, Jeffrey Cole, was prepared to file a federal lawsuit under 35 United States Code, Section 271 for patent infringement, along with a complaint for breach of fiduciary duty. I explained that by fabricating a document and exposing the company to massive statutory damages and criminal exposure, Sylvia had violated her duty to the corporation. Once filed, the details would become public record, destroying the company's valuation right before their annual shareholder audit. Nigel Croft slowly closed the folder and looked at the board members. He told them that they had a serious problem. He explained that if this analysis went to court, the document would be declared invalid, exposing the company to catastrophic liability. Sylvia stood up, demanding they call security to have me removed. But one of the board members, an older woman with a stern expression, silenced Sylvia with a wave of her hand. She asked the chief counsel if there was any way to verify the agreement's authenticity. Croft shook his head, admitting the evidence of duplication was clear. The board member turned to Sylvia, telling her that her actions had put the entire company in jeopardy. Right there, the board member announced that Sylvia Thorne was terminated from her position as Director of Operations, effective immediately. For breach of fiduciary duty, Sylvia was speechless. She looked around the room, but no one would meet her eye. She gathered her papers in a panic and walked out, her high heels clicking loudly against the floor until the heavy doors shut behind her departing figure. The board member turned back to me. She asked if the $12,750 monthly licensing fee was my final offer. I nodded, stating that they had until Friday to sign, or I would withdraw the option and let Apex launch their competitor line. The board member did not wait. She instructed Nigel Croft to execute the licensing agreement on the spot. We signed the paperwork within the hour. I walked out of the AeroClean headquarters as a free man, with a signed licensing deal that guaranteed a steady monthly income, and my dignity intact. The next week, I began my new role at Apex Chemical Solutions. The facility was clean, modern, and filled with state-of-the-art equipment. On my second day, I contacted Jeremy Yates, a junior chemist who had worked under me at AeroClean. Jeremy was a brilliant researcher who had been constantly overlooked and underpaid by Sylvia. I offered him a position in my new lab at Apex, with a significant raise and a promise that his name would be on every patent we developed. He accepted immediately. To celebrate, I took my son Owen to the local animal shelter. We walked out with a scrappy, medium-sized dog with a crooked tail and a missing notch in his left ear. Owen named him Rusty. That night, as Rusty curled up at the foot of Owen's bed, I sat in my living room, looking out at the California hills, knowing we had finally won. The next 12 months at Apex Chemical Solutions were the most productive of my career. In the modern, well-funded laboratory, Jeremy Yates and I worked with a freedom we had never experienced at AeroClean. We were not just manufacturing individual chemical compounds. We were building an integrated sanitation platform. I realized that industrial clients did not just want to buy a single detergent. They wanted a complete system that managed water flow, chemical dosage, and temperature adjustments in real time. Jeremy and I developed a suite of 5 interconnected formulas that reacted dynamically to sensor data. If a factory line was cleaning metal equipment, the system automatically adjusted the surfactant concentration and pH level. It was an operational ecosystem that cut cleaning cycles by 40% and reduced overall water waste by half. Because the formulas were designed to work in synergy, it was impossible for competitors to duplicate our results. By reverse engineering a single product, meanwhile, AeroClean Technologies was spiraling into chaos. After Sylvia Thorne was dismissed, the board appointed a series of temporary managers who had no technical background. They tried to keep the business afloat by cutting costs and diluting their standard products even further. According to Jeremy, who still received text messages from his former colleagues, the company was desperately trying to copy our new integrated platform. They hired a team of expensive consultants to reverse engineer our patented formulas. But Jeffrey Cole had built a massive patent wall around our intellectual property, and every time AeroClean tried to market a similar blend, they received a cease and desist letters detailing their patent infringement. Several of their major manufacturing clients, frustrated by AeroClean's declining quality and rising fees, canceled their contracts and switched to Apex. Within 10 months, AeroClean had lost nearly half of its market share, and their stock price was at an all-time low. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the lab, Julian Ward came into my office with a wide smile. He sat down and told me that the board of AeroClean had officially reached out to Apex to discuss an acquisition. They were on the verge of bankruptcy and wanted to sell their remaining assets before the company collapsed entirely. Julian asked for my opinion on the buyout. I told him that the acquisition made perfect sense for Apex. AeroClean still possessed a large distribution network and several valuable manufacturing facilities in the region. If we acquired them, we could easily convert their plants to produce our new integrated sanitation systems. But I had one condition. I wanted full authority over the combined research and development division. Julian did not hesitate. He told me that the board had already agreed that I was the only person capable of running the merged R&D division. The acquisition was finalized 3 weeks later. Exactly 1 year after the day Sylvia Thorne had tried to cut my salary to $36,000, I walked back into the AeroClean headquarters. The cold tile floors and polished quartz desks were the same, but the atmosphere in the building had changed. The fear and tension that had defined the workplace under Sylvia's rule were gone. I called a meeting of the remaining research staff in the main boardroom. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, looking at the familiar faces of the chemists who had once worked in silence, afraid of losing their jobs. I told them that the era of corporate games and stolen credit was over. I explained that under Apex leadership, every researcher would receive a fair salary, proper resources, and legal ownership credit for their discoveries. I said we were there to build a better system, and that anyone willing to work hard and act honestly would have a secure place in our lab. That night, I drove home in the warm evening light. The sense of accomplishment was quiet but profound. It was not just about the money, though the licensing royalties and my senior director's salary had secured our financial future. It was about the fact that we had survived the pressure and come out stronger. When I walked through the front door, Owen was playing in the backyard with Rusty. The dog's crooked tail was wagging furiously as she chased a tennis ball across the grass. Owen's health had improved dramatically over the year. With the specialized medical treatments fully covered by my comprehensive insurance at Apex, his symptoms had receded and his energy had returned. He looked like a normal 12-year-old boy again, laughing as Rusty scrambled over the lawn. I stood on the back porch watching them play, feeling a deep sense of peace. The quietest moves had indeed made the loudest impact. I had not burned the old company down. I had simply built a better system and let their own corruption do the rest.